Hello, everyone. It is so good to see you all this Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us on our live hiatus. Thank you for joining us for Daily Devotions through Redeeming Life Fellowship. And today, for our daily devotions, we're going to be focusing on Luke, continuing our journey through Luke. We're going to be in chapter 10, verses 25 through 42. And here you're going to find the Jesus being at the home of Mary and Martha, and some arguing or disagreements between sisters. I didn't have sisters growing up, so I don't know much about that, but I learned a lot from what we're reading today. But the focus of today's devotion is going to be on a parable, perhaps the most popular or well-known parables that Jesus ever taught, is the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is actually Luke, or unique to Luke's account, excuse me. And it's like so many parables of Jesus. It has a way of sort of messing with your mind, or getting your mind to think and operate on different levels, to be able to try and see something that you couldn't readily see. Or rather, to actually get past critical analysis, which, as being a person who thinks critically about a lot of things, to push past all of the analyzing and categorizing that sometimes does more to harm than it does to help our daily walk with Jesus, and actually get to the heart of the matter. And that's the way parables oftentimes work. They're designed to do that. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is certainly no exception. And it's also, I think, perhaps among the most misinterpreted, most frequently misinterpreted parables that Jesus has taught. And I want to encourage you, as you're reading, what's true for this parable is also true for, indeed, any of Jesus's parables, is to do your very best to not go beyond the text, because when Jesus is telling a story, it's easy, as the story is being told, for our imaginations to run wild, and to get curious about what things are implied or they're not implied. And you have to do that to some degree, but it's easy to miss the main points of parables when you get so absorbed in the visual aspects of a parable. And what I want us to do is to read and to focus just simply on the occasion for when Jesus is telling this parable, why Jesus bothers to tell it at all, and what kind of implications that would have for us today. So let's read together. We'll pause when we need to in order to be able to make an observation, and then close with a conclusion. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 10, and we're going to be through verses 25 through 37. That's going to be our focus of the devotional today. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." Let's pause there for a second. So, Jesus and this expert in the law are in full, wholehearted agreement at this point, where in response to the expert in the law's question, Jesus returns the favor and asks him a question. What's the most important in the law? How do you read it? And then he quotes from Deuteronomy and Leviticus and pairs them together and says, this is the most essential aspect if you want to inherit eternal life. And that should, I think, I wouldn't say like weigh heavy on our hearts, but hit us hard right there when we're thinking about what it is that we need, that we have some kind of choice or participation in the matter of whether or not we're going to inherit eternal life. And at this stage, yeah, Jesus and this expert in the law are in total agreement to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That's essential. It's key to what it is that he has in mind. And then here is the from this point, this exchange could close, but it carries on. Let's read. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" It's fascinating in this case that when he says to love your neighbor as yourself, that all of that depends on how you interpret or how you understand who is your neighbor. So that in telling the parable that we're about to read is an answer to particularly that question. That's the main focus of all the other things that we're including, or the other aspects or lessons that we could be taking from the parable of the Good Samaritan. The main issue, the main question that's in hand, that's in this view, is who is my neighbor? And that's the question that each of us should be asking when we're reading this parable. Because let's face it, God can call us to love our neighbors, but how you define or understand a neighbor will determine how it is that you're practicing this law that God commands you to live by, that's in accordance with eternal life in God's kingdom. So I can understand my neighbors as being spatially, where I don't have any choices to live next to this neighbor or that neighbor. I choose the house, and whatever neighbors happen to be in, whether they stay or whether they go, that's the neighbors I get. Or the neighbors you might be referring to could be members of your family, members within your own community group, members within your own political party, members within your own socioeconomic class. It could be members of a particular sports team or members of anything. The list goes on and on and on, where in our natural state, it's easy for us to take people who we're familiar with, who we're comfortable with, who we identify with, and dub them neighbors. And it's those people who are the neighbors that we love them as ourselves. And but that begs the question, is that what a neighbor actually is? And so let's read this parable and see how Jesus understands what being a neighbor is. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell in the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." So it's interesting. There's a lot of interesting components to this sort of thing. But one of them being is that 2 very religious people, a priest and a Levite, to people who you would expect to do something about this by virtue of their piety in the sight of God, don't do anything. And that should come as something of a surprise to us, because of all people, you might expect these two people to love sacrificially. But Jesus chooses an outsider, someone who, by measurable standards, whatever discernible standards we have, is an outsider and an untouchable. Maybe untouchable is too strong a word, but definitely not the person you would expect. That a Samaritan comes along and loves this man sacrificially, invests in him, risks his own life, and takes responsibility to see to it that this person, this man who is beaten up and left for dead, actually has a second chance at life. And in short, what this Samaritan is doing is reflecting the mercy of God. Hence, when the thing that the teacher of the law sees in this person is that he looked at this man beaten up and left for dead, and he had mercy on him. And that his actions of mercy were actually motivated by compassion. The same type of, compassion that we see elsewhere in Luke that's motivating Jesus in loving and serving and reaching and bringing life and wholeness and newness of life and hope to people who are lost. And let's just close with these thoughts for a second. In the first place, is it not true that any of us could one day, maybe we are today, in the role of this person who is beaten up and left for dead, and that whether or not we live will depend on whether or not somebody shows us mercy and reflects the mercy of God towards us? The issue that's at hand, I think Jesus, in his parable, is absolutely right in that that whether or not we choose to reflect God's mercy towards us could be a matter of life and death. So this is by no means a trivial matter. But let's return back to the question that the expert in the law posed. Who is my neighbor? We can sometimes be in the position of wanting to justify ourselves before God and saying, this person is my neighbor, that person is my neighbor, and as long as I love those people, that's the thing that's going to justify me in the sight of God. And that's an easy way to be able to reciprocate love and isolate it away from the people who actually need it the most. But that to love your neighbor as yourself means that you are willing to reflect the mercy of God made manifest in sacrificial love towards people who don't deserve it. That's what loving your neighbor actually means. When you see somebody and you want to help and your heart is motivated by the compassion of God because their lives are valuable to God and they should be valuable to you as well. And so I encourage you, I encourage each and every one of us that we would be someone who would go and do likewise. And love our neighbors, not based on their race, their ethnicity, their political affiliations, their circumstances, but that our love towards them would be a reflection of the heart of God that is full of mercy and manifests itself in sacrificial love towards others. So thank you so much for joining us for this daily devotion. Do subscribe if you haven't already, but I pray God would bless you and keep you, and that he would continue to shape and mold us as we continue to set our hearts on him and to keep our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher and the perfecter of our faith. So God bless you. Take care.